will be talking, right?
Yeah, until you present your presentation, your video has to be on, I think.
Okay, let's try this out. I've opened a couple of windows. It's just that there's a bit of a thunderstorm here right now. So I've lost electricity.
Do you have two devices? Do you have
In
two
the light.
devices?
I do. I have a phone. I'm just trying to see if I can log in from my phone as well.
Yeah, just try that. That will work because phone will immediately take. Because and only keep your audio through the phone.
Sure.
Shilpa, you're the host now.
Yeah, got it.
Awesome.
45 people already in the waiting room.
It's okay. I think we'll be done in a minute.
You guys, my phone is taking forever to join. Has the quality of the video improved significantly? I'm hoping. Bulbs, is your internet any better?
Have you joined the phone? You said your phone is taking time because we're still having audio issues here.
All right. Let me just. My phone doesn't seem to be doing any better because of the rain. Let me just.
Should we message in the group saying that it will take some time, 5 minutes to fix because of the rain, some internet issue?
I have messaged on the this one on the work group saying that there is some issue. Yeah, but people are texting me right now.
Is it raining there?
Yeah.
Oh, that's why maybe. I'm panicking right now.
Shilpa, we can leave it like this only.
Yeah. We'll leave it like this. It's better.
Yeah.
Varsha, please call him, no? And tell him to join through audio. It's okay.
Yeah, maybe then he can just share the presentation and talk.
Yeah, it's okay. We'll see what's there.
Yes, Prashant.
Yeah, I told him he's joining. I think we have to try that option that he has to put off his video and just try the audio part.
Yeah, that I think that's okay also.
John, can you hear us? It's gonna rain here also badly.
John is online. Can he hear us?
He's saying
I
he's.
can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit?
Hello. I've got a lovely bunch of coconuts.
It's
Yeah,
better now. It's better.
yeah, better now.
Okay.
We'll
Shall we
see.
let him? Shall we let people in?
Yeah.
Yeah, we can. And also one thing before that, let him speak. In between, we'll see if the video is working out, and then in between, try it out. If not, we'll keep continuing with the audio.
Okay.
And
I think it may just be the course of action because a significant part of my presentation anyways focus on the slides.
no
Uh,
problem. That's
we
fine.
should
That's
take-
When you are introducing yourself, maybe that time, if it works, you can try putting on your video. If not, you can just say that I think I have to switch off my video because the connection is really bad.
okay.
And you can continue.
Let's start. We are live on YouTube till now, so we'll
Okay.
just
I'm admitting people.
yeah, please do. Yes.
Shilpa, you can stop sharing.
Let them come. It's okay. Let them come, and you can start talking.
Hello. Hi, good evening.
Good evening, everyone. Sorry for a little delay because
No
we're
worries,
having
no
some
worries.
network issues. I welcome you all for today's event. Myself, Varsha Solanki, and I'm a faculty of Department of Fashion. I'll be the host for today's event. Uh, Today, as all of you know, we are here to celebrate the World Environment Day and to highlight just a few things, just the importance of the environment, and to remind people that nature should not be taken for granted, and we should spare some time, since we are having that, to spend around nature and look for things which really mean to us. All of us are going through such an exceptional time, and our lives have literally changed upside down, and but what we have got through this 1 year, or through this pandemic, one thing is time, I think so. Time to go back to our hometowns, time to spend time with our families, time to reconnect with nature, uh, time to see little things around us. And today's topic is also related to that, which is time to spend with our friends in the garden. And we might not be able to catch up with our friends right now, but we can definitely catch up with the little creatures which are there around us. And to talk about this, we have a very special guest with us today, Mr. John, who will be taking us through this journey and his love for Mother Nature. He is the co-founder of Spiders and the Sea, an environmental organization aiming to bridge the gap between people and nature through innovative research and a very creative storytelling. I have personally got a chance to hear his story, but it will be really great if all of you can hear it from John itself. I welcome you, John, on the behalf of the whole JD family. The platform is all yours now. Requesting the audience to stay through, and if you have any questions, please put down in the chat box. I'll be taking it towards the end of the session. Over to you, John.
Thanks, Varsha. So, unfortunately, owing to the weather and Mother Nature, who I love so much, I won't be able to present video today because the internet is terrible on account of a thunderstorm. So what I'll do is maybe I'll just start sharing my screen as I speak. So you guys have some pretty pictures to look at. Just get that going. Can everybody see my screen okay?
Yes.
Super. So like Varsha was saying, the whole theme of, well, the lockdown, at least for people like me, has been about getting to know my immediate environment a lot better. And just sort of spending a little more time observing things that I probably didn't observe as much before. Which brings us to something interesting, right? Which is how we interact with our immediate environment and what we define to be nature and the natural world and the wild and all of that. But that's sort of getting ahead of the curve. When I was chatting with Varsha, she also asked me to sort of talk about my journey. So I'm going to reluctantly do that. So this was me in 2017. Probably the second guy from the right, for those of you who don't know me. So yeah, the furthest sort of image you'll have from somebody who's a researcher and spends most of his time looking for spiders. So I spent close to a decade in the advertising industry. I've held corporate jobs, I've lived in different parts of the world. But this was 2017 December, was very close to when I finally snapped. And this was literally a month later when I was living in the middle of the Nilgiris. My colleagues went from being what you saw in the previous picture to this lovely bunch of folks. We had hosted them for a birding program. Most of the colleagues that I had in this initiative were from the tribal community as well. And it was just my life seemingly transformed in just a month when I went from the previous picture to this. But the story behind all of this and where it all starts was oddly a garden. So back in 2014, I visited the garden. This is my mother-in-law's garden, basically. Back then, she still wasn't my mother-in-law, and I was visiting my girlfriend, and I happened to stumble upon their home garden, and this is what it looked like. So for somebody who's grown up in the city and doesn't really have a clue about well, nature and gardens and any of that sort, that was most of my life throughout. This was just mind-blowing. It seemed like a tiny little forest that was sitting in the middle of the city. And it was an inspiring moment to just sort of be there and sort of take in the energy and that much greenery, that much clean air, birds chirping. It was a wonderful little experience. So in the true spirit of lacking originality throughout my life, I went home and decided to start my own garden. And as with anybody starting off in anything, the first thing I wanted to do was get pretty flowers. So I went and I bought a rose and I planted it and I watched it bloom and I cared for it. And it started to become this thing that became a part of my routine. I get up every morning. One rose became a few, as you can see in this picture. I started to nurture them, and in a very weird way, they started to nurture me. I started having my morning tea in the garden that I was now sort of helping set up on the terrace, and it was just a very cathartic experience. So what started to happen was, again, this is somebody who's just got a corporate job, going to work in the morning, coming home in the evening, no clue. But I started to now have something else to do. I was going out in the morning, watering these plants, just watching them. As that sort of slowly progressed, within a couple of months, I started planting other things. What you see on the left here is a Bengal clockvine. And with this sort of growing diversity of plants on the terrace, and you can see a couple of them sneakily in the back as well. With this growing diversity of plants, I started to notice that it wasn't just plants, but animals were coming to visit. So you can see an image here on the right. That's a crane fly that was sitting on this very same plant. And for a person who didn't know the difference between a cockroach and a bird, this was a fascinating thing to look at. I was quite flabbergasted. So I did what any millennial would do. I took my phone out and started taking pictures, as you can see. That picture taking led to some level of curiosity. So I started to share it with people who knew a little more about this stuff. They started to tell me what I was looking at. And as the sort of diversity of my garden grew, I found this old little plastic tub that was lying around my house, filled it up with water, and I started growing plants, aquatic plants in there as well. And within a couple of months, if you see the picture on the right, dragonflies started to come and lay their eggs in there. And they were nurturing their young in there. And as you can see on the right, this is a granite ghost. It's a very pretty dragonfly that inhabits urban Bangalore. And here you can see it actually metamorphosizing and sort of coming out from its pupa form. So all of these things started to become really enriching experiences, right? You wouldn't imagine some of these processes happening in your own home. And then this happened. I came home late one night from work. I was very happy with my garden up until this point. It was all colorful flowers and pretty insects and butterflies and everything. And I walked into something, and the next thing I know, my torso is covered in spider web. And like anybody would do, I shrieked. I ran into my room, quickly started to Google how to kill a spider. Probably looked for the most effective way, or I will probably confess that I probably looked for the most cruel way. Once I had that whole thing down, I went out to look for the spider. I don't know if I finally managed to get some spray or a shoe, but with whatever that was, I went out. And I suddenly noticed that the spider looked twice as terrified as me. I mean, I was petrified with the fact that I was covered with web and everything. But when I went out and I saw the spider, it had run. It had hidden. I just destroyed its web. Of course, none of that occurred to me at the time. I was just like, I'll get you tomorrow. But then I walked into the spider. I walked into my terrace the next evening. This time I was a little more careful. I knew where the spider might be. And sure enough, the spider had built her web there, which is when I took this picture. Also, as you will see, my picture taking abilities have also evolved over time. So when I took this was just a phone, and I had a flash, and I was very proud of this photo back then. I felt very artistic. So then once I started to wonder about that spider, and I sort of decided to let it be. I started reading up about spiders and what they do. And then this whole journey started of, okay, I have a phone, it can take pictures. Let me start taking a picture. So this was the first ever like real spider photo that I took. And this was on a very old iPhone. And as you can see here, this is a spider that lives in pretty much anyone's house. This is a cobweb spider. You'll see them in the corners of your home with those thick clumps of web. And here you can see it very quietly wrapping up a mosquito. So then I thought, hey, it's kind of useful to have these guys around. I'm not too fond of mosquitoes, and seems like they're not too fond either. So, enemy of my enemy is my friend sort of thing happened. And then I was like, okay, let's see where this goes. Sure enough, I spiraled. I went from just taking pictures of spiders to reading up papers about them. I got books. I started to like really get into the concept of this thing that also shares a home with me, right? It wasn't, I mean, when you stop for 1 second and remove yourself from all of the systems that we've created and the sense of ownership that we have in the spaces that we live, the very arbitrary boundaries that we've created for ourselves in society. When you look at it from a natural perspective, nature really doesn't care if you have the deed or if you have a rental agreement with your name on it. It's a space that we all share, all living things. So I stopped looking at this spider as a pest or some sort of outsider there. And it wasn't even a pet, really, right? Because who am I to sort of have that? In all fairness, I was probably the spider's pet. But you sort of look at it from this roommate relationship, as if you're sharing the earth with this other form of life. And then that introduces some really interesting perspectives. Of course, it drove me to a very different extent, where I started to follow some of the spiders in my garden. And if you remember the spider from this picture, I went on to watch her and follow her down 3 generations. And over that time period, I moved from a phone to a point and shoot camera. And ultimately, this was her grandkid. It's the same species. And years later, the same sort of spider and her offspring and the offspring of that offspring was still using my terrace and that garden. So it was nice to see that the concept of an ecosystem that you read about in books and think about as forests and stuff actually exist in your homes at different scales. And my garden had become an ecosystem. My garden had become a place where life forms could have children and their children could have children, and they all existed in harmony. The spiders would eat the insects would feed on the plants, and that whole sort of trophic cycle would just all happen on one terrace. So many years later, I went back to visit my mother-in-law's garden, and now that is sort of the central theme of our talk this evening. So if you look at the pictures that you're going to see now, it still represents a fraction of the wildlife we've seen in her garden. It's just filled with so much life. It's daunting to think that that's a garden that's sitting somewhere in the middle of the city, especially a city like Bangalore. So the spider you see in this picture here, this is a Hylas. So whenever I introduce people to spiders, I always like to start with jumping spiders because, well, they have big puppy dog eyes and they're a little less scary than the other ones. So it's a good sort of breaking in. So here you have a jumping spider that's quietly walking around on a flower. So jumping spiders are a good way to sort of start off in learning the diversity of spiders. Most of us have this notion that spiders build webs and that's how they catch whatever prey they have to catch, but not all of them do. Jumping spiders, for example, it's an entire family of spiders. They walk around and they hunt, similar to a tiger or a leopard or whatever you'd consider a sort of stalker and hunter. So jumping spiders you'll find around your homes, in your kitchens, in your gardens. They come in a variety of shapes and colors, but the best way to identify them are these big puppy dog eyes. So the next time you see a spider that's just walking around your house or your garden, try quickly moving your hand. And if the spider actually stops and follows where your hand is moving, you know you're looking at a jumping spider. And like I said, they come in different shapes, they come in different sizes. This is a 2-striped jumping spider that's sitting on a leaf. Again, if you notice here, resilient fellow has lost one of his legs, but he's still powering through. And the interesting thing about sort of observing these creatures in your immediate environment is that you suddenly realize that a lot of the processes that happen in nature and a lot of things that you'd want in terms of an experience from nature can all happen in your backyard. They can happen in your garden, or they can even happen in your kitchen sometimes. It's this sort of mindset that if you have to experience the wild and nature, you have to go on a trip somewhere, go into the forest, get into a safari, do one of those ecotourism tours. All great experiences, but there's always beauty in the little things, right? And those little things constantly surround you. There's still a very wild environment that lives inside your home. You just have to take the time and the sort of cultivate the patience to notice it. And coming to sort of web building spiders that you'll also start to see around, you'll see some very fascinating little modifications and evolutionary traits in them. If you look through your garden and you find a web and you see a little bit of a string of some sort of dirt stuck on that web, look a little closer because you may have some trouble finding where the actual spider is. This is a debris orb weaver in the genus Cyclosa. So what these guys do, and this is fairly intelligent, is once they've built their web, they line it. If you can see this line of dirt running to the left, whatever debris that falls on their web, they pick it up and they decorate their web in a straight line, and then use the parts of other stuff that they've eaten. If they've eaten a fly, if they've eaten a small bee, they sort of salvage a few of those body parts and create another spider-like decoy somewhere on the side. And imagine a spider being able to process that and do that. The spider knows what it looks like. It knows that there's a wasp that may potentially come and attack it while it's sitting on the web. So it's actually creating decoys on the side. And again, more adorable jumping spider action from the garden. And just for perspective, again, most of these images were taken on one single walk. So you can imagine that if you actually go out and start noticing these things, you'll start to see a whole sort of variety of not just life forms, but life processes that unfold in front of you. So here you have a lynx spider, again, something that's quite common in gardens. And she's very carefully wrapping up her babies in silk. So many spiders, in terms of parenthood, the mother will very carefully lay her eggs on a sheet of silk and then wrap it up really nicely into a safe little ball like this and take care of it. And you see a variety of sort of motherhood habits when it comes to spiders. Wolf spiders will carry their babies, will carry their young when they're eggs in a silk sack. And even after they hatch, those babies actually depend on their mom. They actually climb onto the back of the mom and stay there for 2 weeks. And this really dutiful mother is carrying them around. And while you may not see too many wolf spiders if you live closer inside the city, you can still see very sort of heartwarming cases of motherhood, like this lynx spider taking care of her little ones. And well, they're also a really pretty sight, right? Like a lot of you guys are artists and you're working in the fashion side of things. There's a lot of inspiration to be had from the little things. You wouldn't imagine finding a spider that is specialized in hunting stuff that visits a flower to pollinate. But you have the crab spider that does just that. It waits inside of these flowers for something to sort of come towards the flower for nectar, and that's when they catch them. And it's really fascinating to see that some of these crab spiders start to adapt towards the colors of the flower itself. And the other thing about noticing the little things is these sort of perspectives and these sort of colors and the way life works on a smaller scale looks very different from what you and I would sort of just be normally used to walking around. So there's a lot of beauty in the little things that goes missed. For example, this entire frame is maybe 2 centimeters across. And once you've sort of gotten into the habit of looking at the little things, you won't limit yourself to spiders. You will start to see every little thing. So here you see a plant hopper that's, if you look to the extreme left, pooping out some honeydew. So they feed on plant sap and they excrete a carbohydrate-rich sugar. So then you're like, hey, that's a cool process, but it doesn't stop there, right? So once these guys sort of let out their honeydew, there are things that come and collect them. Ants, for example, many species of ants, in addition to foraging and harvesting and all of those things, actually depend on these sort of extra floral nectar sources. Ants, if you've noticed, are really busy creatures. It's like they're permanently having a Monday morning. And so when they're darting around constantly, that's a highly energy intensive process. So they constantly need to eat, or they need energy rich foods like sugar, which they collect from animals like plant hoppers, or these aphids here, who will also feed on the sap of plants and leaves and young stems and do the same thing. They poop out honeydew and the ants very dutifully collect them and then take them back for the colony. And once you start to notice those things, you also start to notice some very interesting ecological processes. that have sort of shaped evolution over time. So if you look at this photo over here, it's an ant collecting honeydew from an aphid. And if you looked at this picture, you'd be like, hey, same ant. What's interesting here is this is actually a spider. There is a genus of spiders called Myrmurachne that have evolved to look exactly like ants. It may not be too easy to see in this picture because it pretty much looks exactly like an ant. But if you pay close attention, you'll actually start to see that what you're seeing in this picture actually has 8 legs. What it's doing with its front legs is waving them in the air to make it look like it has antennae. One easy way to distinguish a spider that's mimicking an ant is the big puppy dog eyes that we were talking about that jumping spiders have. So Myrmurachne that you will most commonly see if you do manage to find a spider that mimics an ant. Small tip, they're all around you. You just have to really take the time out to notice. And once you see your first Myrmurachne, it pops, and then you start to see them everywhere. This particular spider that you see here, this one very specifically mimics the weaver ant, the red ant that builds those nests out of leaves in trees. And you start to notice that it's not just spiders that are mimicking ants. There are other things that mimic ants as well, like this mantis here. One of the reasons to mimic ants that's used by, for example, the spider, in the case of Myrmurachne, is that looking like an ant has some very interesting benefits. For one, not many things will want to attack an ant. Ants have extreme strength in numbers, in that if you attack one ant, the rest of the colony is going to come after you. Ants are also full of formic acid, which means they're not too pleasant a meal. So for those factors, a lot of predators tend to avoid ants, and folks like this mantis and that spider seem to have figured that out. And they end up looking like an ant. So a lot of their natural predators would be like, okay, that's probably an ant. I'm going to leave that alone. And so when you start to look at stuff like biomimicry and some of the colors and the patterns that these little things have, it truly is inspirational. For example, this blue mud dauber wasp. So you start to notice all these little things, you start to notice all these little functions, you start to realize that something as simple as your garden is contributing to a much larger ecological picture. If you see this tiny little bee here, it's actually pollinating a flower in the garden itself. So you start to realize that you don't really need a forest or anything to start contributing towards ecosystems and a greener planet. Even something as simple as a garden is really going to start to get you there, right? And I know that when you do start noticing these things, there is an innate sort of tendency in us to be a little afraid of the things we don't know. Okay? If there's an unfamiliar shape like a spider or a unfamiliar smell or something that suddenly crawls on you and gives you a sensation you've never felt before, our first sort of instinct, at least for the past few generations, as we've grown disconnected from nature, is to sort of be a little terrified of the whole experience. But I thought I'd share this lovely little quote by Alan Watts with you. He says, by replacing fear of the unknown with curiosity, we open up ourselves to an infinite stream of possibility, right? And I mean, I'll let you guys look that up, the entire quote, and sort of think about that. But just to sort of reflect on it, most of us grow up curious. As kids, we were digging around in the mud. I don't know about today's generations who are mostly digging around on social media, but at least I can speak for my generation when I say we grew up like playing on the street, sort of exploring what was on a tree and all of those sort of things. But at some point in that process, our parents ask us to be a little careful. They say, don't touch that, don't touch this, that'll bite you. Again, all good lessons, but at some point, it goes beyond the point of rational fear to becoming just being afraid of everything we don't know. And that brings me to sort of the theme of this year's Environmental Day, right, where they talk about ecosystem restoration. Now, even for somebody like me, that seems like a fairly very sort of unaccessible topic. It's quite complex when you talk about stuff like ecosystem restoration. So what can we do? Well, we can make lifestyle changes and all of those sort of things, but how can we get involved in ecosystem restoration? Well, it's a complex scientific process, but what we can do is start greening up our spaces, right? Look up native plants, buy those native plants, care for them at home. Invariably, what you'll end up doing is start creating an ecosystem. And you don't need to get like a massive plot of land and sort of develop it and then have a beautiful garden there. You can start simple. This is what we've started doing at home. So we had a bunch of Coke bottles and some that we saw in friends' houses, and we were sort of wondering, well, what should we do with all of this waste plastic? It seems like, well, it's going to end up in a landfill pretty much. So my missus very sort of innovatively found a way to chop them up. We also found a plank of wood that somebody was not too keen on using. We brought that home, got a couple of zip ties, and she turned this into a small little vertical garden that we now have going. And I think it's been a week or two since we've done this, and we already have little visitors. So we get beetles, we get crane flies. I think we've seen a couple of butterflies, a lot of different types of flies that show up here as well. Definitely some spiders. And so you start to make these tiny little changes, right? So inspired by her, I took this, we got takeout the other day. And so I didn't want to throw the box away, but at the same time, I didn't know what to do with it. So I just filled that up with some of our compost. And now I've started growing succulents in them. And you can see a bottle on the left growing a money plant. And it just doesn't need to be, that focused. I also found I needed a lamp. So I just made one using an old bottle lying at home. And now there's a lovely little money plant growing in it, and I threw some lights around. So when you talk about ecosystem restoration, remember that your home is an ecosystem. Even a single room is an ecosystem. A shoe box could be an ecosystem. It's about what you allow. I mean, I say it with a pinch of salt when I say what you allow. But unfortunately, we have some level of control over what happens in spaces, right? Human land use change is vast. So when you do have control over these spaces, think about native plants. Think about stuff that will make sure that the space that you have isn't limited to just you. Create a space that sort of nurtures life in general, and you'll start to see more and more things come in there. And remember, like Spider-Man's uncle said, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So when you have these resources at hand, and like Varsha said, in addition to all of those resources, you now have a lot of time sitting at home. Try to think of ways in which you can sort of create safer spaces for life of all sort of shapes and sizes. And with that, I end my presentation. Do you guys have also, yes, like she mentioned, I work for Spiders in the Sea. My wife and I, we co-founded it. And we sort of work on nature education programs. We do our own research, especially around spiders and stuff like that. So if any of you would like to get in touch with us, those are our social media handles. And if you want to see some of the work that we've done in the past and sort of that we have queued up, you can visit our website. It's more or less updated. So yeah, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them now.
It was lovely, John. The way you talked about the story, how you got inspired by spiders and everything, we were so enriching. And I'm damn sure that, a lot of us would have fallen in love with spiders now. We have definitely good. Some of the questions here. Let me just read out. Just give me a second. Uh, One of the question is, are any of the spiders shown poisonous to humans? If yes, can we tell the difference so we don't harm them and stay safe?
Oh, excellent question. Couple of points there. Just because I'm also a bit of a grammar Nazi. So when we talk about poisonous things, those are things that are harmful to us if we ingest them, right? So poison is something that you eat, goes into your stomach, and then it breaks down and then kills you. A venom is something that's injected into you. So spiders are venomous, yes, uh, but they usually carry enough venom to kill a fly. So if they do bite you, there's a good chance you may get a little bit of a bump or a rash, but nothing more than that. There are some spiders in the US and Australia that carry enough venom to kill a person. But in India, you're pretty safe because no spider that you're likely to encounter is going to be remotely venomous enough to do anything more than a mosquito bite. So yeah, so you're fairly safe around urban spiders at least.
Have you got bitten by one anytime?
Lots. Um,
I'm sure.
Mostly while I was asleep. So
Another question we have is, like earthworms, how do spiders help us in enriching our home gardens?
again, great question. So I'm sure you already know that earthworms primarily sort of chomp down on the soil and they poop out nutrients, making the soil richer. Um, Spiders, interestingly, have a much larger role. So spiders, for example, their larger ecosystem role, if you will, if I had to sum it into one thing, is that they control insect populations. So spiders, if you extrapolate, eat anywhere between 400 million tons to 800 million tons of insects every single year. Um, so what that does for your garden, for example, is if there are, and I wouldn't call them pests, right? There are herbivores. There are insects that will come and their life depends on eating plants. What tends to happen is if there are no spiders, you would have a population of herbivores that won't let your plants really grow. They'd all be chomped down. So the same way a tiger keeps deer populations in check, a spider would keep insect populations in check, especially herbivorous insects. Um, and interestingly enough, spiders also self-regulate their own population. So if there's not enough insects coming in and now there are too many spiders, spiders will just go around eating other spiders and sort of keep their own population in check as well. A lesson we could definitely learn from them.
Lovely. As our students are the artists and designers, a lot of them are, look for inspirations around. Which is the most beautiful spider you have encountered till now, so that they can go back and research on the same?
So that's a tricky question because literally every spider is the most beautiful spider I've seen. But to give you guys some sort of ideas to look for inspiration, rather than tell you one spider, I'd say depending on what you're looking for. For example, if you're looking for inspiration in vibrant colors, right? I'd say, again, I can type these names out here or share them later. I'd say look for a spider called Chrysilla. The colors are just unreal. Everything from red to purple to blue is on that spider. I think you've seen that picture I took in Goodlure of that spider. Quite a spectacular little fellow. There's also something called the Gooty sapphire or the Gooty tarantula. It's a tarantula that is sapphire blue with like yellow streaks. So again, from a color perspective, for me, those two spiders would be sort of a good place to start to just go crazy with colors. If you're looking for inspiration in terms of form and design, I would say just look at spider webs, especially webs of orb weavers. The geometry on those webs is ridiculous. And even if you watch the entire construction process, it's also something that's very sort of inspiring in terms of how those lines and forms take shape, and eventually turn into radials and then become this whole functional unit that is both aesthetic and functional in the same sort of go.
I think orb weavers are also something we can spot in our gardens.
Absolutely. Most garden orb weavers are nocturnal, so you'll have to get a torch and go explore your gardens at night.
All of us. Okay. Another question we have is that any plants you recommend for the first time gardeners to start with?
Um, I'm not a very good person to talk to about plants, but what the other thing I would say is think about what sort of, because again, when you talk about getting a plant, and this is just my personal opinion, you are investing in a life form, right? So it's sort of like getting a dog, or like somebody like entering your family. So when you do that, make sure you have the kind of space and resources to support the plant in the long run. So if you have a lot of space, I would say something good to start with is a lime plant. They're great for butterflies, they're great for insects, and you'll have a tiny little ecosystem in no time. You can grow chilies in the shade of the lime plant, and you'll also feel personally invested because, well, you get free lime. This is always a plus. I don't think anyone has lost from getting lemons, if you'll pardon the expression. But yeah, so that'd be a good place to start. If you don't have too much space and you just sort of have desk space or smaller bits, I'd say I think there's a question below above that as well. I personally like to grow succulents indoors because you don't require too much care, um, and it's a good place to start. You feel good about yourself for not having let a plant die, which was great for me because I'm usually terrible at these things.
Another great question we have is that sometimes when eggs are laid in the garden, there are chances that they are washed off during the watering. So any way we can avoid that?
That's an interesting question in that definitely, I mean, it also boils down to what eggs you're talking about, right? So spiders may have egg sacs like that. You may have other insects that are laying their eggs and attaching them to the underside of a leaf. Butterflies do that. Some plant hoppers do that. So it would depend, but fundamentally, it does get a little functional after a certain point, right? You can't not water your garden. Um, so I'd say when you are watering your garden, pay a little attention to how you're going through the whole thing. And yeah, otherwise, there is likely to be some collateral damage, but not too much if you just watch where the water is going.
So the take is just to pay attention whenever we are there in our gardens and
Yeah,
watering.
no, enjoy the experience of watering it. So there, if uh, per chance the idea is to water the plants while looking at your phone and checking email, now you have a reason not to. Look
Definitely.
very closely at the plant and then slowly pour the water so you really take in the details.
We have a question which is in perspective to fashion.
Sure.
Uh, I know that spider webs are more stronger than steel. What's your take in converting them on fabric? Like some species in Madagascar have such webs which can be converted into fabrics. And have you come across any such species in India?
Sure. So that species that you may be talking about, I'm not sure if it's Madagascar or Spain, but they did do something silly like try to make a shirt out of spider web.
Yeah.
So the thing is, spider silk is definitely stronger than steel because its tensile strength is ridiculous. Um, Pound for pound, I think spider silk is about 5 times stronger than steel. To also give you some perspective, if a line of silk has to break on its own weight, it has to be 80 kilometers long. So it is incredibly strong, and the strongest silk is made by a spider that's also found in India. It's called the golden orb weaver or the giant golden wood spider. Uh, you'll see it even if you go a little bit outside the city, Bangalore, anywhere in India, really. Um, there's a lot of work that's been done in terms of trying to use its silk as a fiber for different reasons. One of its biggest applications is potentially being used as a bulletproof material because it's so strong. What they're now doing is to harvest, because if you want to get that much silk out of spiders, you should actually read up on that whole project that they did to extract silk from spiders and make that shirt. It was some ridiculous number. They had to like pull the silk off 1 million spiders just to make that one shirt, right? And that is silk that the spider would have used for its like entire natural life and processes. So it's not really feasible from that standpoint to catch 1 million spiders and have the sort of invest in the labor to extract that silk. What they are doing as an alternative is they are taking the genomes of that spider, injecting it into a goat, and then 2 generations down, they take that goat, harvest its milk, and the milk has the same protein fibers as the spider, at least a very small amount. And that's showing some promise in terms of being able to reproduce the sort of fibroin strength.
Oh, that's something really inspiring. I will definitely go back and do some research about it. We have one more question. I think probably the last one we can take is Navina is always reluctant to have a garden as she's scared of attracting reptiles. Is she wrong about this? I mean,
Um, it's hard to say what's wrong and what's right. Um, what I would say is the thing is, once you have a garden, um, actually, really, even once you have a home, eventually nature will try to find its way in. Nature's always looking to give you a hug, so that hug will come in many different shapes, whether it's a spider or a mosquito or a reptile. So when you talk about reptiles, the primary thing I suppose would be lizards. That's the most common thing you're likely to find around homes. And once you have a garden, there is a chance that the diversity of lizards may grow a little bit. But outside of that, is there a particular reason you're scared of reptiles? Is it just an innate fear that you have,
maybe
Navina?
Navina.
Because if you do, it's perfectly natural. We're all scared of something, right? There's nothing wrong about it. It's just that it boils down to what we choose to do with that fear. Um, and you can just ask yourself if
Okay. Hi, this is Navina here. I am terrified by snakes.
fair enough. No,
I
so
Yeah, so every time I think of having plants, either I'm just like, okay, what if it just comes in like, stay somewhere and I wouldn't even know. Am I wrong about this, or can I still have my garden?
I'm fairly certain you can have your garden. Um, you may attract some reptiles, right? Like maybe lizards at
I love
best.
lizards. I'm okay with lizards.
So, what sort of reptiles are you terrified of?
I told you, I am terrified of snakes.
Oh, of snakes. Sorry, I missed that part. So I mean, depends
That's
on
all
where you
right.
live. If you're in the middle of the city, there's highly unlikely that you're going to encounter a snake in your garden. If
Which I'm
uh,
not.
so, all right. So you're closer to the outskirts, and if you have a fairly large garden,
Yes.
yeah.
I know. I'm thinking about a very small garden. I mean, like a terrace garden. That's about it.
Oh, I
Snake
mean, if you're
definitely
terrace,
won't come.
you don't have to worry about snake.
Oh,
Uh,
please. I've seen they are on trees and all. Like I've visualized sometimes and I've freaked the hell out. It stopped my idea right there.
no, absolutely. So I think you hit the nail on the head when you said you've seen them on trees. So
Yeah.
Probably a rat snake, maybe.
no, the ones you see on
Varsha, I'm scared of an image of a snake.
no. So the thing
Yeah.
that you've seen a
All right.
snake live on a tree. That's probably because the snake lives on a tree. Uh,
Yeah, maybe, maybe,
Snake
maybe.
is, yeah, it's not too keen on apartment terraces. Um,
Okay.
you should.
Hopefully, yes. Okay. I have Naveen for support.
There you go. So yeah, I mean, the other thing to also, on a more serious note, to think about is if you do live in a place that you think is also sort of inhabited by snakes, and you're not keen on them coming to your terrace, there's some simple things like just cutting off access. If there are no branches touching your terrace, there's no way the snake can sort of, well, snake's not going to climb down the tree, take the stairs, and come up to your garden. So you should be
Yeah.
fine.
Yeah. Sure. Sure. Yeah. Thanks.
Uh,
Wonderful presentation, though. I really liked it. It was very nice.
Thank you so much.
John, I think we can take one more question. One of the question is, so my mom owns a very beautiful garden with more focus on orchids. I have seen many snail variants that visits her orchid space, but I also hear a lot of complaints from her because some species like African snails keep destroying the orchid. So as a plant lover, she keeps saying plants with chemicals which kills many other insects apart from snails in the process. Um, I mean, if you can just
So
answer
that's
what's your take on this?
very tough situation where and sort of classic conflict situation. But if you can't help it, right? Like if your mom's attached to her orchids, then that's just it. I mean, I can't like sit here on my high horse and say no, you should let everything live. I mean, she's growing those orchids. Those orchids are also a form of life, and there's the morality aspect here is very sort of gray. Because I know that most people that I know as well who have the most lovely gardens are also not too fond of snails, especially more than anything. They also try to find ways to keep aphids out and stuff like that. What you can do in terms of a middle ground, at least, as far as I know, again, nowhere close to an expert on these matters, but rather than use some of those pesticide type chemicals, just experiment with organic means. I know that some people try to use water in which cooked rice was soaked. Once you've cooked your rice, the water that's left over there, the starchy water, continue to soak a little bit of that cooked rice in it for maybe a day or two or something of that sort. And then basically there's a mild amount of alcohol that forms in that water because it's fermenting almost. When you spray that, it's supposed to be an organic, natural sort of pesticide. So there's no easy way to do it, but there are less harmful ways to do it.
That answers her question. Uh, Coming to the end of today's event, I think the next time, personally, if I gonna see the spider, I will definitely not gonna kill it, and at least that much I can do. Thank you, John, for taking out your time from your schedule and telling us your love story towards Mother Nature. It was definitely really inspiring. I'm sure it was very inspiring for the students and the faculties also. I would also like to thank the management team who has provided this platform for hosting such kind of events to us. Also, thanks to the PR team who's present here today. Cheers up to the entire 3C team who's working hard to host such kind of events. And my lovely audience, thank you all for joining us. All of you are here today, and I think that's the first step towards environment, that we are listening to the talks. It's coming in our mind that we want to stay connected to nature, and wishing you all a very happy Friday and good health. And today I think John's video was off because due to some network issues, and it was also raining in Bangalore, so really sorry for that. John, if you want to elaborate on something.
No, I think I've done enough talking for now. But no, thank you guys for the opportunity. It was an evening really well spent with some amazing questions also to sort of end it. So thank you guys.
Thank you so much. Okay, stay tuned for the next event, everyone. Thank you for such a good response.